Okay, so let's see who's next. How about value of talent? John Sumser. And where's Raga?
Right there.
Is Raga going to present it?
He's going to tell me what I'm wrong.
Okay.
Which is never. So we had a one. Eve, can you give me lessons? Oops. We had this great session. There were 8 of us in the room, and we tackled this question of the value of talent, which my friend Raghav would argue is something like, simplistically, something like all of the profit that a firm generates. And I'd argue the value of talent is some interesting function that happens when you dump talent into the business machine and there's some return that comes out the other side, and it's not necessarily significant. And so we started with that as the basis and spent a bunch of time in a really good exploration about what happens to talent, how does it work in a company, and how is that value expressed inside the company. And it turns out that we came to a reasonably interesting consensus that what makes organizations different is the way that they utilize talent and the way that value emerges from the organization because of the talent that's got in. And that may be the characteristic that defines the differences between organizations. That spawned a fantastic conversation. I would ask for a little bit of help with the conversation about the index, where we agreed pretty much up front that the idea that you could really have an accurate measure of talent right now in an organization is a lofty ambition because there's some data that's missing from that equation, like the construct of the labor market and the competitive factors inside of the labor market. But what emerged was this wonderful idea about building a raw score index that's universal across companies, that's got 10 or 12 variables ranging from organizational overhead, like the cost per hire, to the cost to acquire talent in a specific niche, to the way that that talent is converted from an outside resource into something that's productive and emerging inside, and then having weights by company that allow the company to express its individual, or organization that would allow the organization to express its individual take on the market. We talked at length about the awful experience a couple of folks had. Anybody else have a bad time at the Sofitel? We seem to have the corner on the market of bad time at the Sofitel. Why? The customer service people are crummy. Why? Well, piece of it is you can't live here on what they pay a customer service person. You have to go about 70 miles out to find a place where you can live on that wage. And so you get a certain caliber of talent for that money. The question is whether or not it's in the business model of that organization to shift its customer service investment in order to get a different kind of outcome. And we hashed and rehashed the various scenarios about why a company might or might not do that. If you've got Oracle and EA as captive audiences and you're essentially a dormitory for those operations, why would you invest in customer service? Is a conclusion that we drew. So I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind just like to be on the spot? Kristen works at Whirlpool and has been figuring out this idea. She works at Whirlpool, and she's been figuring out this idea of an index for measuring the value of human capital in an organization for a while. 2 or 3 bullets.
Sure. Well, really, and you brought up the point, John, that when, if you're in HR and you go into the leadership and you say talent's, the most important thing and it's everything that matters, they look at you like you're a little bit loopy, the loopy HR guy. So if we arm our HR folks to walk into the CFO or the CEO with an actual dashboard that shows the value of talent in an organization. So we talked about developing these 10 to 12 criteria to measure talent and give a raw score that all companies could measure themselves against, something like an EVA, but we called it the talent value. So I don't know if it's a TVA, talent value assessment, whatever. But then because it's different in each organization, for example, at Whirlpool, cost per hire doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot to us. It's all about the quality of the hire once they're in the organization. So for us, if cost per hire was one of those metrics of the index, it would be weighted less than the quality of the hire. And so we really played around with that a whole bunch, but that gives a universal measurement for the value of talent and also allows for the customization of that measurement for your organization and provides another aspect of workforce planning. So as the workforce changes and your organization needs to change with it, you can look at that dashboard and say, okay, we haven't put a lot of value on this in the past. This is how we see things changing. Let's up our focus on this aspect of it.
So what was neat about being in the room is as this idea emerged, the whole tone of the conversation shifted pretty dramatically. I think if we'd had a vote, we would have hung out another hour or so to try and flesh this out a little bit more, and we got the momentum towards this really interesting idea, and it became a collaborative process. 90 minutes into our 2 hours or something like that, you know. It took us a while to, well, there were some really obnoxious people in the room. A while to get used to me.
You seem to encounter a lot of them, John.
Okay, so I think that's a perfectly delicious summary. Any questions?
Yeah.
Did you guys feel like you had consensus? Did you talk about the 10 to 12 data points? Or that Kristen hit, or was that a topic area that you guys floated around in terms of is there ability to get consensus within an organization of those 8 things or 10 things?
I think we agreed that you could get pretty interesting consensus outside of organizations and bring in the standard pretty quickly. There's a range, right? Tara King, who was part of the conversation, where'd you go, Tara? Oh, hiding. Her company uses an index like this for matching to hiring manager requirements at the front end of the process, right? So there are some, I think, reasonably standard, easy to quantify pieces at that point in the process, and then the aspect where you harvest the value out of the human capital that you bring on board, and the costs associated with harvesting that value as you bring it on board. Subject to some conversation, but I don't think it's that far out of reach to get to the place where you can start to measure long enough to find out whether or not what you're measuring is interesting.
And whether it correlates to the bottom line.
Right.
Well, I just have a comment. It's not really a question, but we're talking about this a lot right now at our senior HR staff here at EA, and we had a professor recently come in from USC to spend some time with us. And the aha for me around where sort of the HR function and talent management functions are devalued by companies is because we don't have that common language around what we do. So if you think about finance or marketing that are sort of steeped older traditions, I mean, you don't argue about what a P&L is or what profit is or what, cost of goods sold are. There's a definition and everyone knows about it, and even in a decentralized environment like EA, we measure those things and we all know what it means. And I think as HR leaders and talent leaders, we have done a disservice to ourselves because we don't put those principles or frameworks or common language around what we do. And so even though we're all doing the same thing, we're talking about it differently, so there's no momentum behind it. And if there was one sort of social platform I would love to rally behind in our function to professionalize it and get it the respect, it is to do the diligence that it sounds like you're starting, but really take that across our profession. And I love the fact that you're making it customizable to your business, because you're absolutely right. For some companies, cost of hire matters, and for some, it just doesn't. But I think we could really gain a lot for our profession if we put that effort.
This gets my nomination for the thing that you picked up and take forward.
John, I was just going to say, I would also add to what are the common questions that the analysts are asking, right? Because that's what's resonating right now with our CEOs when they're on the phone with the analyst and the questions come up around talent. And what are those? And what is being valued on the street? And how do we incorporate that into this to this common language, because I couldn't agree with you guys more. And that's my afternoon session, I'm excited.
You may have already actually said this, and I just didn't understand, so maybe my bad. Deming always said, before you indict the people, look at the system in which they're embedded as to what their performance is. Are you saying that you think you can distinguish between the intrinsic value of a Steve Jobs and the value of Steve Jobs in a particular setting that, in fact, he may not be able to tolerate, or you may not be able to tolerate him?
So we didn't get there in the conversation, but my answer is $1 bill is the same as another dollar bill, and you don't make that discrimination when you assess the performance of capital in your organization. And I'm not sure that you make individual assessments when you assess human capital in an organization. Individual assessments.
You can or you should?
When you assess the overall performance of the human capital in your organization, in total, the outliers are outliers. When you want to bump the performance up, one way that you might bump the performance up in an organization is to focus on the outliers, but there are Deming-like possibilities too. So
This sounds like a fascinating conversation for lunch.
okay.
Good job. Way to go, Hunter.
That's your dad.
I'll deal with him later.
I guess I'm not going to be invited this weekend.
One thing I wanted to add on the metrics, especially on the corporate metrics. One thing that we did, in fact, when I was at TalUncon Research, was metrics that measure what we call return on people, and that's something, a high-level metrics that you could speak, that your CFO could speak, and it's actually operating income divided by total labor cost. And we have articles and those kind of things. But this is exactly the type of metrics that is really easy to understand, easy to make the difference between, you see the difference between processes and people from one company to another. So yeah, those metrics start to appear, and it's good. And what we've seen as well is companies starting to also have what they call their people reports, so which is different. So I would love to share that with you.
Thank you. And thank you, John. I think many people have this hidden desire and this dream to bend Wall Street to HR's will. And I would propose that maybe as part of a lunchtime discussion, we take a look at balance sheet issues versus P&L issues. Because the bottom line is, on the balance sheet, people still show up as a liability, not an asset. So when all is said and done and you're trying to do the analytics behind people, they still come out as a liability. And how could you price them as an asset with balance sheet, which would get Wall Street to think about that differently? Okay,